Welcome back to Master Your Marriage. Last week, we tackled the difficult process of rebuilding trust after betrayal. Whether it's one big breach or a series of small ones that have added up over time, trust in a relationship can break in so many different ways.
And in that episode last week, we focused on what the transgressor needs to do to repair and rebuild. Things like full disclosure, full transparency, and taking full accountability. But we ended the episode with a really important question. What about the hurt and wounded partner?
Yeah. What if your partner is doing everything right, sort of owning their mistakes, they're working through the steps, right? They're making real changes, and they're showing you that they're committed, but you still just can't stop thinking about what happened. Maybe doubt creeps in. Maybe even years later, you find yourself bringing up the betrayal every time you're having an argument. Maybe part of you just can't let it go.
And that's what we're talking about today, because when we've been hurt, our natural instinct is to want to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. We don't want to be hurt again, right? But at some point, if we want to move forward, we have to ask ourselves, are we actually allowing the healing to happen? Are we open to seeing our partner as they are now, or are we still holding on to the past?
Today, we're going to explore what unforgiveness costs us and what it really takes to release the pain so that we can move forward, not just for our relationship, but for our own peace. Coming up next on Master Your Marriage.
So when we've been betrayed, it fundamentally changes how we see our partner, doesn't it?
How can it not?
Right?
Yeah.
Even if they're doing everything right, we don't just automatically forget what happened. Our brains are wired to protect us from future harm. And so one of the ways we do that is by developing something called a confirmation bias.
Oh, that's a big word.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, it's common in the scientific literature, but in this purposes, confirmation bias means that we continue seeing our partner through the lens of this past mistake, this past betrayal, right? Mm-hmm. If we believe that they are untrustworthy, our brain will automatically look for evidence that supports that belief. We pay more attention to the moments that confirm our fears while dismissing the ones that contradict them. Maybe our partner's really being open and honest now, but we just don't see it because we're still scanning for that deception. Maybe they're really trying to prove their reliability, but we're stuck waiting for the other shoe to drop for when they're going to be unreliable. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're managing their reactivity, but we're only going to see those brief moments when they really do get upset, even if they correct.
And this creates this distorted reality because we're only seeing a part of the picture. Right? And this is where we have to stop for a minute and kind of look at ourselves and self-confront as the hurt partner, the wounded partner. We have to ask ourselves, what is my actual attitude right now toward my partner? What are the belief systems that I've built around them since the betrayal? Am I seeing them as just a liar, as just a deceiver? Am I seeing them as someone who is fundamentally flawed or fundamentally unsafe?
I like what you said there. We created this reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a hard truth to admit to ourselves. It's hard to admit that maybe that I do have this bias, but it's necessary for us to do that, because if we're not willing to acknowledge that bias, we probably won't ever be able to move past it.
Oh, that's not good. Right.
And the reality is people aren't just one thing. They aren't entirely good or entirely bad. And of course, as humans, we like to categorize everything as black and white because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel safer. But in reality, we live in a lot of gray, and people can be good and still make mistakes. And those mistakes, well, it doesn't necessarily account for their entire character.
I love that. Trying to put somebody into black or white. You're either a good person or a bad person.
And that's what we tend to want to do because that's easier for us than admitting that life is sometimes quite gray.
Yeah. And I think to be honest, truly evil people, truly bad people are so far down the list in like 0.001%.
Right.
That we need to accept that other people are just having this human experience.
Just like we are. Making mistakes as well.
Doing that. So the real question becomes, am I willing to see my partner as they are in this moment, in today? Can I recognize that while they made a mistake and they hurt me, that moment doesn't define their entire personality? Am I genuinely allowing them space to change?
Right.
So this brings us to the heart of our conversation today, forgiveness. As we talk about forgiveness today, I want you to consider its impact on all of your relationships, not just your marriage. In couples coaching, we spend a lot of time exploring family origin patterns, the ways our early life experiences have shaped how we are now as adults and our adult relationships.
Right.
So as we dive into this topic, I want you to think about how this applies not only to your partner, but applies to your parents, maybe your siblings, your friendships, current and past, and maybe anyone who maybe has hurt you.
Super important. This is relevant for all the relationships we've ever had, past or present or future.
Or future, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So forgiveness is a topic that's fascinated me for a really long time. But there was a moment that completely changed the way that I saw it. And
I remember this story.
It's a good one. In 2015, I was attending an NLP certification training. It was in San Diego. And during the session, the instructor guided us through a forgiveness practice called Ho'oponopono. It's an ancient Hawaiian practice. And as part of that process, we were instructed by the teacher to imagine the person in our mind who has wronged us. And only in our minds, this is all an imaginary process, we say, I forgive you. Please forgive me too. So a woman in the room, she was sitting in the back. We won't use her real name. Let's just call her Sarah.
Okay.
She raised her hand in the back and she had this kind of almost stern, hardened sort of presence about her. Her hair was pulled back. She didn't wear any makeup. Not that that matters, but just giving you kind of an image. She wore dark colors. She wore overalls. Anyway, she raised her hand. She asked the instructor, what if I don't know who wronged me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, of course, confused, the instructor replied, I don't understand. How do you not know who it is that wronged you? And so Sarah went on to explain that while she was serving in the army, she had been drugged with the date rape drug and she had been raped. And she had no memory in her mind of who her actual attacker was. But as she described this, and I was sitting in the room listening, as she described it with tears flowing, she was practically pleading, saying, I just need to be free of this. I don't know what else to do, and I want to let it go.
Man.
Right. And the instructor assured her that, you know what, it's okay. Like, even if you don't remember the person, your unconscious mind can create some representation of that person. And he encouraged her just to go with whatever her mind created and to trust the process.
Wow.
Yeah. So after, I mean, can you imagine?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I mean, I remember when you first told me this story and I'm still just,
I know.
I don't know, so many times.
You've heard it a few times.
Yeah.
Well, so anyway, after a few minutes, he asked her, you know, can you trust the process? And she said, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to trust the process. But then a woman sitting right adjacent to Sarah raised her hand. She was indignant, like visibly upset. And she asked, quote, I'm quoting her, why the hell should she, meaning Sarah, say, please forgive me too, to her rapist?
Right.
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 And before the instructor could even respond, Sarah turned to this woman sitting next to her and said, it's okay. It's okay. Really. I need to be free of this because if I keep holding on to it, it is going to kill me.
That's the thing that people don't understand about, you know, we see it with these really traumatic events, and we're going to outline a couple more, like just how much it weighs on them. If you can be self-aware enough to understand.
And how much they are willing to do whatever it takes to let it go.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So Sarah went through the process, as we all did together as a group. And then it was the next day she walked into the room different, visibly different. It wasn't just that she was now wearing makeup and that she had let her hair down. It wasn't just that she had kind of traded in those overalls for a really pretty dress, but it was that there was this lightness about her, a glow that she finally, it looked like it looked like she was finally able to breathe after holding her breath for years, you know? And you could see it just looked like freedom, right? Like she just looked free. And one by one, all of us went over to kind of introduce ourselves to her, to give her a hug, tell her how brave she was, and thanked her because what we got to experience and witnessing it was something really profound.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I never told you something though that I found out later. I did. I finally learned the rest of Sarah's story, which was really interesting.
Oh.
I didn't ever see her again. And so I didn't know what had happened to her. But I recently found out that what she didn't say that day is that she had actually been on the verge of suicide.
Oh, geez. Oh my gosh.
Just got emotional. But anyway, but forgiveness saved her life. And, a lot of us couldn't understand that day why in the world she would say, please forgive me too, to someone who had brutalized her in such a horrific way,
and caused her that pain.
And caused her that pain. Yeah. But as she explained it later, and I was able to learn about this, she explained that after the assault, she'd become really bitter and really angry, and she'd pushed people away, and she had hurt other people, and she wasn't proud of who she had become as a result of that.
Yeah.
And she realized that she did need to be forgiven too, not for what had happened to her, but for the way in which she had responded to it.
Yeah, the way she led her life after that.
The way she lived her life after.
Yeah.
So that experience was powerful. It changed me, and being able to sit in that room drove me to really want to understand forgiveness more. And
Wow. Absolutely. All right. Jeez. How do I follow that?
Sorry.
Let's talk about what forgiveness really means. It's easy to say the words like, oh, okay, I forgive you. Much like children do, but I think children just forgive automatically. They don't hold that grudge, right? But is it really just words?
Is it just saying, I forgive you?
Yeah. If it was that easy, I think it would be a lot easier.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's actually much more. Forgiveness is the process of letting go and releasing all those negative emotions like resentment, like anger, and the desire for revenge, right? That we want for someone who's wronged us. It's the process of replacing those negative emotions with something more positive, even if it's just compassion. Maybe it's just empathy. This process can unfold over time, step by step, as we work to shift our emotions from negative to positive, or at the very least, negative to neutral.
Yeah, that's the
getting
goal.
rid of the charge, as we call it in the
Exactly.
NLP world.
Yeah. And in relationship work, we talk a lot about forgiveness versus unforgiveness. And unforgiveness means we're holding on to that grudge, and it can show up in different ways. It could be like, I want to get away from you.
Yeah.
Or even thoughts like, I kind of want to get even with you. I think of it this way. If the betrayal that happened, as you think of that betrayal in the present moment, and if it happened a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if it still makes you furious today when you think about it,
Right. Like, oh, I can't talk about it.
Then you probably haven't experienced full forgiveness.
Or even tried, right?
Possibly.
The problem is, as a culture, we can become so focused on justice, right, that we've refused to forgive. And we see that everywhere.
We're super focused on justice. And it's interesting as you say that, it reminds me of a client that I once had. And as I was talking to her about doing some forgiveness work, she said, oh, no. I can't do that, because if I forgive him, it would tip the scales of justice. I thought that was such interesting language. It'll tip the scales of justice in favor of this other person who is her perpetrator.
She'll let him off the hook.
She doesn't want to let him off the hook. And she feels like that would let him off the hook or tip the scales of justice with such interesting language.
Yeah. We see this mindset sort of celebrated in our culture today. And even some highly influential psychologists will say, like, you don't need to forgive. You don't need to be the big person.
Yeah.
And while that may be true, you absolutely have a choice. You also need to understand. You also need to understand that unforgiveness comes at an amazingly high cost. There's overwhelming current research showing that holding on to resentment, right, holding this grudge, raises our stress levels, raises your cortisol level, disrupts sleep, impairs digestion, right? It even makes you older.
Ages us,
right? It weakens our immune system and even contributes to cardiovascular disease and chronic pain.
I've seen it a lot with chronic pain.
Yeah. So the idea that forgiving someone tips the scales of justice, well, that may be in some world true, but what many people don't realize is that unforgiveness tips those scales against us as well.
Against us.
Yeah.
We're the ones that tips it towards.
We end up suffering that. It's that old adage that I love to say, which is, holding a grudge or resentment is like taking poison, right? And hoping that the other person dies.
Exactly.
Because it truly is. It's poison to your body.
And think about it as it relates to the story I shared a few minutes ago with Sarah, right?
Yeah.
Her story.
Desperately wanted to let go.
And what was it costing her to keep that unforgiveness? It was costing her so much mental and emotional anguish that she was ready to take her own life.
Yeah.
Like, how costly is that?
Yeah.
That's the most extreme costly, right?
It's well worth the price of that course that she took.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I remember reading a case study about a young girl whose family was murdered in this home invasion, and she had carried so much bitterness that it really consumed her, and it turned her into someone that she didn't really recognize. One day, I think she decided to learn a little bit about the man who had killed her family, what his life was like in prison, like how he was doing. And as she did that, something shifted. She began to see him as a human. And in that
Mm.
moment, she made this, what would consider, an impossible choice to say, I forgive you. Please forgive me. Probably forgive me for the hatred that I've held towards you. All
Yeah.
those negative feelings that I've held.
I think what you said is actually a side note, just such a crucial element that goes along with forgiveness is it can be more possible when we can start to see the other person as human.
Yeah.
Right. Again, going back to what you said earlier, I am human. You are human. I make mistakes. You make mistakes. If I can start to see you as someone who is human rather than a monster, then
Yeah.
I'm on the track of being able to forgive.
Or if I can start seeing you as somebody who's fallible and maybe there's another reason for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that story you shared about the home invasion, there's one mother story that comes to my mind that I want to link in here. And it's the story of Immaculée Ilabageza.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you've heard her story,
Yeah.
Robert and I got to see her speak at a conference once, and she survived the Rwandan genocide. Holocaust,
Terrible,
basically.
yeah.
And she survived by hiding in this tiny little closet with 7 women packed in this little closet. And she stayed in there for 91 days while this genocide was happening. And her entire family and all of her friends were slaughtered.
Yeah, everybody that she knew.
Everyone was killed. And yet she came forward, and this is what she writes books about and speaks about, is she forgave what would be so unthinkable for me to be able to forgive. And I remember her speaking at this event that we went to, and so many of her words stayed with me. Like she said, how do you forgive someone who killed your entire family and everyone that you love? And she said,
this is cool.
It felt like freedom.
Yeah.
It felt like peace. And she said, we have to tell everyone that forgiveness is possible because anger only hurts and paralyzes people.
So amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember listening to her story and I'm like, man, I don't even know what I would do.
If I could even channel like 10% of that. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting pattern in these stories, right? The people who have endured maybe the most horrific experiences seem to be the ones who are most eager to let go of their pain.
Yeah. What is that about?
I don't know. Meanwhile, the rest of us who were cut off in traffic are going to hold a grudge looking for that truck for the next, looking for the next month, right? Convinced that somehow holding a grudge in this negativity serves us, right? But maybe it's because those people who've experienced these horrific losses, unimaginable, can clearly see the cost of unforgiveness, while the rest of us don't always recognize how it's quietly, literally eating away at our health and our lives.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Why is it that, we can't forgive the guy who cut us off on the freeway, who was probably just trying to get home because, he had a doctor's appointment or he was sick or he had to go to the bathroom or something like that.
Say.
Yeah, he just had to go to the bathroom.
Somebody cut us off. Well, I think they have to go to the bathroom.
And yet
we'll
those who seem to have the biggest reason to not forgive are the ones that want it the most. And maybe it's because they realize just how much it's costing them and hurting them.
Absolutely.
And so I guess, part of it makes sense when you think about the stories and the myths and the misconceptions that we create or the beliefs we create about forgiveness. There's a lot of them. And, I was just on the phone today with a friend and we were, of course, forgiveness came up because this has been on my mind for the last couple of weeks. And she said, if I forgive this person that she was talking to me about, if I forgive them, aren't I just opening myself up to get hurt again by them? Aren't I just opening myself up to more pain?
You think about it that way, right? I mean, that it seems logical in that instance.
And yet it's still a false dilemma that we put ourselves into because why can't you do both?
You can.
Why can't you forgive and still have boundaries with this person moving forward?
I think people don't know how to do that. But that's the truth, right?
In fact, and I told her, I said, you don't even necessarily have to have a relationship with this person moving forward. You could forgive them and then see if you even want to have a relationship. You don't necessarily have to let them back in your life. So forgiveness doesn't mean automatically that, now I'm opening myself up to be hurt again.
Yeah. It's that joke. It's like, I don't know, my anger and my And my unforgiveness keeps me warm at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It just keeps me up at night. I'm not getting any sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what it is. Another common misconception that comes with withholding forgiveness. Someone holds the other person accountable as if our refusal to forgive them ensures that they'll suffer for what they've done. Right? That's that I'm taking the poison and hoping that you'll get sick and die.
Which, going back to that client that I mentioned earlier who talked about, I can't do this because it's going to tip the scales of justice in his favor. She felt that way. I mean, I think she said something to the effect of, you know what? I don't think I can do this because I don't think he has suffered enough yet for what he has done.
The poison she's drinking hasn't affected him yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So I asked her, I said, well, how does holding on to this anger cause him to suffer anyway, whatsoever, in like any way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
And she took a deep breath and said, you're right. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I think we can try to make our partner pay when we're hurt, that whole hurt people thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm still mad. I haven't forgiven you. So every time you come through the door, I'm going to let you know that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just continuing to drive that wedge, right?
Yeah.
So back to what your client said, like it doesn't hurt them, right? Unforgiveness doesn't punish them, right? Refusing to forgive somebody only punishes you.
Yeah.
Right. So you've been listening to us for the past 15, 20 minutes or so, and you might be wondering, should I forgive that person in my life? And you're probably thinking about somebody right now or some hurt.
I guarantee it.
Right. And I guess maybe the question would be, do you want your future to be better than your past? Do you want less stress? Do you want more lightness? Do you want to be able to engage in life without having this thing, holding over your head, triggering you the minute anything similar comes in?
Do I want my future to be the same as my past or different from my past? It's a great question.
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, I want it to be different, then we have to change some things.
Yeah.
We have to start paying attention to the thoughts that we think, the thoughts that we're holding about this other person. We have to also recognize the emotions that we're holding on to. Recognize that those old emotions are just keeping you anchored to the past. So, if you want a different future, do those emotions belong in your future? We all have some imprint, right? Some emotional imprint of something that's happened in our life. We have those the anger, the frustration, bitterness, whatever it is. But if we continue to live by those old emotions, they're going to shape our thoughts, future thoughts, which are going to change, which are going to shape our future behaviors, which is ultimately going to shape our future reality.
Yeah. I mean, right? It's the past informs the present.
Yeah.
Right. And so the other thing I want you to think about that, especially if we're stuck with these emotions that are in the past, is not only is it the person who hurt you, much like the Sarah, who was bitter to everybody in her life and wasn't a very pleasant person to be around.
Right.
I'm just guessing, right? Based on your description.
Yeah.
Right. So think about the rest of your relationships now. You're hurt by one person because you're so mad and angry about it. You've spun this whole thing up and now you're lashing out at everyone else.
That's right.
Right. So you need to be able to just get off to this hamster wheel, right? Instead of repeating the same experiences over and over because we're operating from the same emotional state, we're unable to move on to a different future because we're chained to the past.
That's right.
We can't move forward when we're holding on to this unforgiveness.
Yeah. Well said. Well, I can promise you this. We create our own reality. Our thoughts and our emotions drive our actions, which shape the world that we create, that we experience. And so I had this thought as I was preparing, I had this thought today and I realized, yes, if we're creating our own reality, we really have two choices for this reality of the future that we're going to create. The first choice, option one, is I can wear my grudge colored glasses and I can filter the world through my past hurts and I can live in those old emotions, recreating, like Robert said, hamster wheel, the same painful experiences over and over. Or I can choose to believe, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, doesn't matter. I can still choose to believe that the person who hurt me wasn't acting with intentional malice. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they were a victim of something themselves. Maybe they were just doing the best they could with what they knew at the time that it happened. And even if they did mess up, I would still rather forgive and move on than spend my whole life believing that the world is out to get me, my partner is out to get me, my friends are out to get me, everyone's out to get me, and have that negative lens that I use throughout every relationship that I have.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And maybe that's an illusion, right? But it's an illusion that's going to lead, one is going to lead to suffering, and the other illusion is going to lead to peace. And I'd rather have peace.
I love that. I love that. So here's the thing. Couples in long-term successful relationships, they learn how to forgive. When two people fight, and then if they truly forgive each other and move past the experience, something shifts in their relationship. If the subject then comes up again, it's really not a fight. It's just this thing that you've sort of healed over. It doesn't get used as a weapon. You're not going to bring it back around and throw it in their face, right? If it resurfaces, it's not as an old wound, but it's more of as a lesson. And I want you to think about the way that you were raised. Because I think in some families, holding grudges is like, it's important. This is what we do in this family. We don't forgive people. We hate the neighbors, right? Because their dog crapped on our lawn or something like that. And so, and I see this in families where they like to hold a grudge and the whole family sort of just piles on with that. I want to challenge that. I want to challenge that perception. Like, it doesn't have to be you. You don't have to let that inform who you are, right? Let the present inform you, and then let's just work on being a little bit happier, working on Charlotte's illusion if that's what it is, but you'll have a lot less negative side effects physically, emotionally, and even in your relationship if you'll just learn how to forgive.
Yeah. And I love what you said. One thing I want to go back to what you said a second ago. Don't use these things from the past as a weapon. I mean, that once it's in the past, it's in the past.
Yeah,
you and I tell stories here on the podcast all the time about our past and how it wasn't pretty.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But what we share, hopefully the message that we get across is the lesson that we're able to talk about it now, not as a tool or a weapon to hurt each other with, but as a lesson that we've learned from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Well, if you are struggling with unforgiveness, we do utilize a couple of really powerful release tools in our coaching sessions. We use timeline therapy as an incredible way to mentally and emotionally let go of things from the past.
It's amazing.
It is. And we also guide our clients through a process called Ho'oponopono, mentioned it earlier, which is deeply healing, and it's a forgiveness practice. So if you would like to work with us in that regard, you can apply for coaching on our website at masteryourmarriagepodcast.com.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. If you found this episode helpful, please leave us a 5-star review and a comment. We would love that. And as always, if this episode resonates with you and you think that somebody could use it, please share it.
As always, be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. Remember, it's the small things done often that create the biggest impact.
Until next time.